Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 10th of July, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information right here on Alaska Weather, or by following us online at weather.gov/Alaska. You can find us on social media using twitter.com. Simply look for NWS Alaska, NWS Juneau, NWS Fairbanks, or NWS Anchorage, or even NWS APRFC. That's short for the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center. Our official website, of course, is www.weather.gov/Alaska, or you just type in weather.gov/Anchorage, Juneau, Fairbanks, or APRFC. You'll get to those same places there with the official information. And, of course, give us a call, 1-800-472-0391 anytime. Let's take a look out into the big world, and using the FAA aviation weather cameras today, had a little bit of a wind shear across parts of southeast. Here's a look at Angoon earlier this morning. A little bit of rain passing through the region today. You can see some of the low clouds up against the hills. Otherwise, well, pretty standard southeast day, otherwise mild. Does look like drier weather is coming your way later on in the week, though. So perhaps by Thursday and Friday, you'll start to see some improvement if you're looking for some of that sun back over southeast. Today, though, liquid sunshine for areas in southeast. And because of some of the rain we've had in the region, advisory out for flooding is possible around the Squentna and Yentna areas. We're looking for higher than normal waters there, and maybe a little bit of beach or riverside erosion because of some of the fast-moving waters. So keep your eye on that. A flood advisory is in effect for the rivers there around the Susitna Basin, especially around Yentna. As we take a look at fire danger, though, you can see some improvements across South Central, and that, of course, is due to recent rains across South Central and Southwest. Many areas up across the interior are also seeing improvement, but started out at a higher level. So everyone's kind of coming down in that fire danger, but the interior was way up here, and so we've still got a little more room to go. But you can see a broad area of high fire danger into the Copper River Valley, across the Upper Tanana and the Upper Yukon, and into the Middle Tanana Valley. And a few pockets remain of extreme fire danger, some of those very close to the Fairbanks region, as well as up around North Pole and generally south and east of Arctic Village. This is the latest. You can find more information about fire danger in your community. If you want to look at kind of information we're seeing, simply head to fire.ak.blm.gov. Now, here's a visible satellite picture, and you'll notice low pressure, several waves of those stacked up across the Gulf of Alaska all the way through the Alaska Peninsula and the western chain. Underneath that, of course, is pretty frequent rains across the Prince William Sound region. Another one of these bands passing into southeastern Alaska today. Another wave here across southwest, and the overall guiding feature in the upper atmosphere is steering all of this with a trough of low pressure at the jet stream level. Now, there aren't that many breaks in the cloud cover. High pressure is having a little bit of trouble kind of establishing a grip across the region. There are a few pockets of more stable air out there, and you can see some of that across the southern Bering Sea and the central and western chain. Overall, though, we are being guided by this very counterclockwise rotation there, which is that low pressure system in the upper atmosphere. And underneath that, those several surface waves that are helping to create the rainfall across the region today. Here's a look at the surface map there. We'll talk about those upper level features when we get to your aviation forecast in just a minute. But we do have a broad area of low pressure stretching across the Brooks Range out toward the west coast, and underneath that and south is where we're finding more clouds and a much more broad area of shower activity and rainfall, for that matter, across southeast, Gulf Coast into Prince William Sound and across the Alaska Range. On the north side of the range, we're finding some areas of light rain and not a whole lot of thunderstorm activity this afternoon. Most of that has been out across eastern Canada and then way out west across eastern Siberia. And then we have a trough of low pressure, a dying front here across the Aleutians. On either side of that, some fog across the western part of the Bering Sea. For tonight, we expect to see one of these bands moving in across the northern and eastern Gulf. This is going to reinforce the opportunity for rainfall for many parts of southeast. You'll notice the pressure pattern here. Those lines, the black lines that we see, are isobars, or lines of constant pressure. And if you imagine this like a topography map, which is how the best way I can talk about it, I guess, we have valleys here. Low pressure would be the valleys, and high pressure would be the mountaintops. So in this case, high pressure wants to push air all the way down toward low pressure. So from the mound here on top of the mountain all the way to the valley down below, just the same way that water moves. You can imagine the air moving across this weather map. And so we have a pretty broad valley here, but when you get into the steep valleys where the lines are closer together, the air wants to move a little bit faster, just as the water would move faster running down a higher or more steep hill or terrain. So the winds aren't too terribly bad. That's the short answer of what I'm trying to say. With the pressure pattern being a little more relaxed across some parts of southeast and across the west, we're not really getting that big burst of wind that some of us have been dealing with for on and off for the last week or so. Now, as you look at across southeast as we get into Wednesday, winds are coming up. Notice how those pressure lines start to pack in a little bit more. And when you're thinking about places that get a lot of wind and are susceptible to wind, the Lynn Canal would be one of those spots. So don't be surprised to see winds coming up here and maybe some strong wind wording as you're looking at the forecast then from our friends down in the Juneau National Weather Service office there. As you look out to the west, look for showers across the Gulf of Alaska, and then our low pressure system here across the Bering, really not going anywhere fast. 998 millibars, areas of light rain and drizzle with that. Another wave south and west of the Aleutians. And then across the west, a shower and thunderstorm activity across the middle and upper Yukon, across the western Brooks Range, and probably out toward Arctic Village and eastward into the northern section of the Yukon. On the south side of this, a better chance for just plain old garden variety showers across the Alaska Peninsula, Lake Iliamna, and into the Alaska Range again. Continued showery activity across south central and Prince William Sound and the northern Gulf. So more of what you've seen today. It's going to be back in the same old places tomorrow with the added bonus of a few more areas of thunderstorms across the region. Let's take a look on into Thursday, and you'll notice the breadth of those shower and storms are kind of decreasing a little bit from west to east, and that is because this pressure pattern is starting to shape up into a fairly decent ridge right here across the west coast. So almost overnight, the whole pattern changes at least for a day or so, because as you look out west, you see another wave strengthening down to about 998 millibars. That's not terribly strong. Certainly not as strong as the last wave that came in from the west, but a very similar pattern there to what we were dealing with as we went into Sunday and Monday there. Low pressure is also stretching out of British Columbia and into the Yukon and the very eastern edge of the interior. With that, we'll see showers stretching into the Brooks Range again. Fewer shower and storms firing up with the heat of the day across the interior, the middle Tanana Valley, and then southward into the Copper River Basin. We've got showers in for southeast tomorrow. Now, one thing that could happen a little bit beyond shower activity, there is a wave of upper level storm energy that's going to be crossing the Gulf as we go. And it is indeed possible that we'll get some cloud buildup and shower activity across southeast. But if it is just a little bit stronger, just a little bit, you might get a thunderstorm out of this. So for right now, looks like we're going to call it showers across southeast, but be mindful, if you see clouds keep building up, it certainly could turn into something just a little bit more than that. Low pressure just south and west of the Pribilofs will drag in some drier air back here. The winds will pick up a little bit more across the central and western chain, but ahead of that, you're going to get a steady southerly flow, and once again, that could mean slightly higher than normal surf for parts of the south and west. That could also mean if you just got the boat parked up on the beach, you might want to bring it up just a little bit further as you get into Thursday and Friday as this weather system comes in a little bit, because it is going to be pushing a little more water with that steady south fetch coming in across west and southwestern Alaska. So brief break in the rainfall for western Alaska, but then a return to those southerly winds as we go. Let's take a look at temperatures as we get into tonight and early tomorrow morning. It's going to be a mild night across the Yukon Valley. 40s and 50s there. Look at Unalakleet, 55 degrees. 51 around Fairbanks, Fort Yukon, mid-50s as well. The North Slope should see temperatures at or above the freezing point for the most part. 32 around Utqiagvik and Barrow, 37 around Kaktovik. You get into the 40s as you get down toward Point Hope and Point Lay. Kotzebue Sound temperatures in the lower 50s, lower to mid-50s for southeast. A mild night for you, though damp. And south central in the upper 40s to lower 50s there. Some of the eastern sides of Anchorage and into the valleys, you might get cool again. Many places saw temps back in the mid-40s this morning. And southwest, Bristol Bay included, back in the mid to upper 40s for you. St. Paul, if you're watching there tonight, hello, 44 degrees. And mid-40s around the Alaska Peninsula out toward Unalaska and Dutch Harbor at about 42. Highs there tomorrow, back in the mid-50s. Same goes for Nikolsky as you get out toward Adak and Atka, lower 50s. Closing in on 60 for Kodiak, upper 50s to almost 60 degrees in south central. Probably not quite recovering to that tomorrow. The middle Tanana Valley should be a little milder than what we'll see down south. Mid to upper 60s there. Fort Yukon again, one of the warmer spots around Ambler, lower 60s, about 63 there on the map. Point Hope, 50 degrees, 39 around Barrow and Utqiagvik, upper 30s to lower 40s for Kaktovik out toward Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, mid to upper 50s, maybe even a few 60s across southern parts of southeast as we get into your Wednesday. Morning lows Thursday, 40s and 50s for most of the interior and the west, 51 around Shishmaref, 30s for the north slope. Southeast, you're looking at 40s to low 50s. South central, near 50 degrees, and 47 around Dutch Harbor, 50 in St. Paul Thursday afternoon, and pushing 70 degrees in the interior for Thursday afternoon.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On aviation weather now, IFR conditions are going to continue across the north slope. No big change up there across the north and eastern Gulf Coast. We're going to see at least MVFR for many from Prince William Sound all the way into southeastern Alaska, and for many across the higher train up through the Lynn Canal around Cape Yakataga and then westward into Prince William Sound. You're going to also look at least some period of IFR conditions. That's going to extend up through Dehne Pass and around the Alaska Range, and then hit and miss across the west and southwestern coast along the western side of the Alaska Range, and then across the central and western Bering Sea, also fairly close to St. Paul and St. George. By the afternoon tomorrow, we expect to see really little change across southeast and the northern Gulf. There will be openings across the Gulf itself, but closer to land, visibility and ceilings will remain low. Widely scattered showers and thunderstorms expected around the Brooks Range. A little bit less activity right here across the middle and upper Yukon. And then as we get back toward the Alaska Range and the middle Tanana Valley, expect a better chance of thunderstorms again as you move further southward. IFR lingers across the north, across the central and western Bering, close to Nunivak Island and north and east of the Pribilofs. And again, like I said, little change across parts of southeast. As we get into Thursday morning, IFR continues across the higher terrain, the Lynn Canal, just east of Gustavus, all the way up toward Yakutat, and then across the Copper River Valley and around the Chugach, around Prince William Sound. Parts of the north and western Alaska Range, the North Slope, and across the west, with MVFR lingering across parts of the YK Delta, mainly south of Ammonok to just about Dillingham or so. By the afternoon, big improvements for your Thursday anyway. You'll see a few shower and thunderstorm spots firing up across the interior, maybe the Copper River Valley, and then perhaps enough heating and instability around southeast to have some thunderstorm activity there. We'll have to see if that pans out. IFR conditions stretch from St. Matthew through the Pribilofs, through the central chain and up the Alaska Peninsula, especially on the Pacific side. MVFR conditions across the southern half of Kodiak Island, and much improvement across south central and for many in southeast. Here's your pass conditions in detail now. For Anaktuvuk Pass, we expect to see marginal conditions most of the day. Adigan Pass also looking for at least marginal weather for your Wednesday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass look to be IFR most of the day. Rainy Pass should see a transition toward improving ceilings and visibility as we go, and we expect similar conditions around Windy Pass all the way through Isabel Pass and on into Metasta Pass, where conditions should be pretty good. VFR there, but again, we'll be watching for convection later in the afternoon. As we get into Dehne Pass, expect marginal conditions most of the day. Portage Pass will start at IFR with some improvement to be seen. And Chilcoot and White Pass, both Wednesday and Thursday, look to be mainly IFR. Freezing levels tell the story of low pressure hovering very close to south central and western Alaska, and that has brought in a lot of cooler levels across the west and the southern coast. You'll notice readings there anywhere from about 6 to as low as 4,000 feet, and if you go out toward the Gulf of Vanadier, levels are as low as 2,000 feet there. Up the north slope, 6,000 feet to about 8,000 feet will do the trick. And for southeast, levels stretch from 6 to just above 10,000 feet as you get out toward the Dixon entrance. Icing potential is certainly there. Right now, most areas are looking at least some threat for isolated moderate, but it's pretty high up there, about 8 to 9,000 feet, maybe even above 10,000 feet in some cases. We'll also run the risk for isolated severe with any areas of convection firing up, so keep watch on that. Most areas for southeast to south central and the west coast are looking at levels at or above 9,000 feet, even pushing 10, like I said. The jet stream has several waves of low pressure passing through. One of those is working through southeast right now. Underneath that, winds are around 65 to 85 knots. The main parent low here across the Bering, what's driving the cool and wet weather for many locations now, is still sitting out in the Bering, and the wind speeds on the west side of that are running around 95 knots, and another wave is moving off of the southern end of the Kamchatka Peninsula. At 9,000 feet, you can see the broad southwesterly flow. It's generally light, 20 to 30 knots in most areas over the Gulf and into southeast, about 10 to 20 knots for south central and southwestern Alaska, a westerly flow across the north slope, and then low pressure has faster speeds here out across the open waters of the Bering. At 3,000 feet, the pattern is pretty much the same. We are detecting some faster speeds here across the central Gulf, so might see another push of moisture and weather moving in towards southeast tomorrow. and light winds across most of the mainland. Wind speeds about 5 to 15 knots, and faster winds just to the west of the Pribilofs at about 20 to 25. What about turbulence? Right now, the threat seems to be fairly isolated for your Wednesday. The greatest risk would be in the vicinity around any areas of convection or thunderstorm activity, which would imply severe turbulence potential. But right now, our main issue will be across the eastern Alaska range and some of our passes below about 10,000 feet, and also around Kodiak Island below 4,000 feet as we get through your Wednesday afternoon. Stay tuned. We'll have a look at your marine weather and, of course, an update on the sea ice edge in a moment. Eric, you're going to talk to us a little bit more about weather satellites and how that can keep Alaskans safe and protect our property from wildfire, right?
That's right, Dave. Today's topic is where there's smoke, there's fire. And thanks for having us back again to Alaska
Anytime.
Weather. Well, weather satellites have a lot of different instruments on them. It turns out that the electromagnetic spectrum has a lot going on in it, and only one part of that is visible light, what we see.
Right.
Weather satellites, of course, report that. Today's topic is wildfires.
Okay.
There are some people who say that in Alaska in the summertime you don't have severe weather. These people are usually from Oklahoma or somewhere, and F5 tornadoes tend not to occur in Alaska.
Right.
People have also said what we do have in the summer. What is Alaska's severe summer weather can be hydrology,
Right.
flash flood and erosion in the mountains and things like that, and fires, wildfires.
Absolutely.
Those were here in 2004, certainly remember that. We've got an example here from 2014. Now it was a quiet season overall, but in May, down on the Kenai Peninsula, we had a wildfire on the Funny River, and this is a satellite image from a polar orbiter that went right over Alaska, and we can see the plume of smoke coming out of that fire on the Kenai, curling down. It's caught in the wind.
Right.
It goes down toward Kodiak Island, curves around. You can see it circulating around a low pressure system that's in the Gulf of Alaska.
It was a beautiful picture.
Oh my gosh.
Except there was a fire.
There's a fire there. The nice thing is with this satellite image, you can tell where the fire origin is, where
Right.
the smoke is coming from. And it's a color image. We're looking at the wavelength spectrum of about 0.4 to 0.7 micrometers or microns. That's what the human eye would see. If you were riding on the satellite and looked down, you could see this kind of an image.
Right.
So that's pretty nice. But it turns out there's more to the electromagnetic spectrum than just visible light.
Okay.
You've heard of infrared, ultraviolet, that kind of thing. If we move into longer wavelengths, let's go to one specifically, 3.7 microns.
Okay, 3.7.
Why worry about that one?
Okay.
Well, we've got an example here. 3.7, it turns out, happens to be very sensitive to a certain temperature range, temperatures where fires burn.
Okay.
And so we've got an example zoomed in a little more from that same Funny River fire down on the Kenai Peninsula, and we can see that you get up into a few hundred degrees Fahrenheit,
Right.
and that's where the colors are. We can see there on the Funny River fire to the west and to the east, almost a horseshoe shape there, is not only we're seeing where the fire is in a general sense, but specifically where's the active fire
That is where
front.
it's burning right now.
And it's
Amazing.
3.7 microns is the important temperature there.
Okay.
That's right.
So this is really important to firefighters on the ground, people that are making plans and directing the firefighters on where they need to go and cut the trenches and keep people safe.
You know it. If you want to fight that fire, you got to know where it is.
Okay.
You got to know the leading edge. We've also got a movie loop, nothing quite like animating it in time.
Yeah.
You can see the fire spreading out over time with a succession of film or a succession of images. Now this is one channel, 3.7 micron. You know, we looked at that color smoke image before.
Right.
And that's actually a red, a green, and a blue. That's how you get color imagery. What if you took 3 different wavelengths in the infrared? You went from like 2.2 micron, 1.5 micron, up to 3.7. You mix them together, you get this other kind of color image, which is even a better way to sharply bring out the details of where that leading edge of the fire is.
Okay.
You'll note, though, in the infrared, guess what? We don't see the smoke. That's too bad. And on these movie loops, you can see the clouds go by. These channels can't see through clouds. The lesson is there's no one perfect solution. You got to have the visible, you got to have some of that infrared single 3.7 channel, some of the infrared mixing to help get a different perspective. Another one, we've talked before about a fun channel called the day-night band.
Yes, one of my favorites.
Oh yeah, and in Alaska in the winter, it's great. We've got all this darkness. The day-night band is so sensitive to seeing light. You can see features that otherwise aren't available. Now in Alaska, when you have a forest fire, it tends to be light out all the time.
Right.
It's our summer. But we can go down south to the Rim Fire in California in 2013. Now, okay, it was in California, not Alaska, but Alaskan crews went down to fight that fire, so we can talk about it here on Alaska Weather. Here we have a a 3.7 micron channel shot of the rim fire, again kind of a horseshoe shape showing that active fire front down there. And then we'll look again to the day-night band, the visible light, and then you can see how the fire is all bright. You can see the active fire front and actually the city lights over there too. Turns out that the cities, while they're active in a social sense, are not really hot in a fire sense. So they don't show up in the 3.7 micron. They're not hot like a fire is, but the fire in the cities look the same from a visible light perspective. And a fun thing here too is that we can see the smoke plume going north from the rim fire on the day-night band. So if we were ever to have, like in 2004 in Alaska, you get dark at night, we still had an active fire season that year.
Right.
That was, you know, that really bad year. The day-night band didn't exist then, but if we had fires now in August, we could use it then. The lesson here is weather satellites, they offer many different wavelengths of light. Some are used for different purposes, and some of these we just looked at tonight are especially helpful here in Alaska to find and to track the behavior of these wildfires so the crews can go out there and do their jobs.
Sure, sure. So a satellite toolbox for the firefighting crews and the fire weather forecasters, and it just underlines how important satellites are, especially for Alaska and our mission for the National Weather Service to protect life and property, and also to enhance the national economy. So wonderful stuff there, Eric. And people can look at pictures like this anytime by going to gina.alaska.edu. You'll find images there all around Alaska at various times of the year, and not just about fire weather, but volcanic ash and smoke and anything else you want to check out. They're always beautiful pictures and always interesting to look at no matter what time of the day. Thanks again for joining us, Eric. We appreciate it and welcome you back anytime.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
On your sea ice edge now, it looks like we're seeing the breakup of shore-fast ice across many communities in the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast, and improvements and melting continues around the Chukchi Coast as this edge is moving northward there. In the course of the next week or so, it looks like we'll get more of a southerly flow. It's going to move this up a little bit further to the north here, maybe as much as 10 to 20 nautical miles as we get toward Friday. For the very latest sea ice edge analysis, as well as the forecast and stage deciphering there, you can check on each one of these areas and figure out what the concentration and the stage of the ice is very easily on our website. weather.gov/Anchorage/ice is the tool for you there. This is the latest update from our Alaska Sea Ice Program team. Here's a look at the weather in southeast now. Southerlies will be picking up across the Lynn Canal. Probably some strong winds there in your forecast as we get going into Wednesday and Thursday. Southerlies 25 knots with 5-foot seas. Otherwise light winds across the central and southern inside passages there. A northwesterly flow in Clarence Strait. As you get out across the outer coast, 10 to 15 knots there. More of an onshore flow, about 10, very light from the west and southwest. Probably looking about 7 to 8 feet in most areas. 7-foot seas outside of the Dixon entrance. As we get into Thursday, we're going to keep the winds in from the south for the Lynn Canal, but they diminish by about 5 knots. So 20 knots in from the south. 4 knots, 4-foot seas expected. Northwesterlies coming down through the inside passage. Notice the winds are picking up here across Clarence Strait from the northwest with 4-foot seas, and a west and northwesterly flow. Still generally light across the outer coast, 10 to 15 knots, looking at 5 to as high as 7-foot seas there on Thursday. South Central, light winds inside of Prince William Sound, but wet, 2-foot seas expected there. West and southwesterlies across the northern Gulf, a 6 to 7-foot sea. South and westerly, southerly winds blowing north across Cook Inlet. So if you're down around the Kenai, the Forelands, or southward, it's going to be a choppy day at the beach or out on the water. 3 to 5-foot seas expected there on that 15 to 20 knot wind. For Thursday, light winds from the south, 10 to 15 knots. You're looking at about 2 to 3-foot seas. And south and westerly flow across the north and western Gulf. Look for westerlies to remain light inside of Prince William Sound, but probably still wet. A 2-foot sea expected there on Thursday. Inside of Bristol Bay, westerlies at 20 knots. You're looking at a 6-foot sea. About the same there down the coast, maybe more or less of a wind. Southwesterlies at 15 knots. 10 to 20 knot wind from the south and west coming all the way from Sandpoint up toward Kodiak Island. 5-foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait, 7-foot seas on the eastern side of Kodiak Island, and 5 to 6-foot seas on the Pacific coast. More of a south and easterly flow now bending into low pressure as we get into Thursday. The low back in the central Bering Sea and strengthening. 10 knots inside of Shelikof Strait with a 2-foot sea, but seas pick up as you head down the Pacific coast. 4 to 6-foot seas there, and 3 to as high as 8-foot seas as you move down the Bering Sea coast. Smaller seas inside of Bristol Bay, stronger winds and higher seas north of Cold Bay and False Pass. As we get into Wednesday, southerlies remain generally light across the central and eastern chain. Out across the west, a south and westerly wind about 20 knots or so with a 6-foot sea. from the west and southwest. Again, the low pressure system strengthening here, and as we get into Thursday, it moves a little bit further eastward. You can see the higher seas there painted in purple, still not terribly bad, but stronger winds will be found across the eastern chain, 25 to 30 knots with 8 to 10 foot seas in the region. Out to the west, a west and northwesterly flow is strengthening, 20 to 25 knots with seas ranging from about 6 to 8 feet on Thursday. Across the west coast, look for light winds inside of Norton Sound, otherwise westerly onshore flow about 15 knots or so around Nunivak Island, and southerlies for St. Paul, St. George, and up towards St. Matthew, 15 to 20 knots with a 5 to 8 foot sea. As we get into Thursday, an offshore flow is developing thanks to that low pressure system out across the west. Remember, it's pulling all this air eastward. 25 to 30 knots there, looking for 8 to as high as 10 foot seas. Generally speaking, a southeasterly flow, pretty light across Norton Sound though. 10 knots, 2 foot seas expected there on Thursday. Across the ice, up north, light winds blowing onshore, 5 foot seas for the Beaufort seacoast, but much stronger for the Chukchi. 15 to 20 knots with a north and northeasterly wind running around 3 to 5 foot seas there. By Thursday, a south and southwesterly flow, 3 to 4 foot seas expected with the winds coming in a little bit more. That southerly flow eventually makes its way out to the Beaufort later in the week, and light winds starting to blow offshore for the Beaufort seacoast over some of that non-shorefast ice now. Recapping tonight's weather, showers will continue across the interior, fairly widespread, especially across south central, and then more of a general rain for southeast. Several waves of low pressure are working from west to east across the Gulf. Tomorrow we'll focus more on widely scattered shower and thunderstorm activity across the northern interior, all the way from the Brooks Range out across the Kobuk and Noatak Valley and southward. Maybe not as much over the Fairbanks region though. Showers continue for south central and southeast, southwest, especially in the interior, and rain developing around a strengthening area of low pressure in the Bering, deepening to 998 millibars and a strengthening south flow for the west coast.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.